how do you start divorce proceedings? How long does it take? And then let's talk the money.
There's lots of different ways. What you want to avoid is years later thinking, I wish I had thought about that.
Welcome to today's show. We're talking today all about divorce and how to navigate it, busting those myths, and we've got loads of questions and practical tips for a top expert. Joining me today is Antonia. She's a partner at the family firm Mishcon de Reya. That firm is actually famous for helping Princess Diana with her divorce, but also she's in the Tatler address book, so we're in safe hands. So welcome, Antonia.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Should we start at the beginning? Like, how do you start divorce proceedings? Like, what do you actually do? You see it on the films where it's the race to the solicitor, but is that true?
I mean, not so much anymore, because there's actually a portal, which is the easiest way to do it, a government portal. So you just go online and it's really...
We're in the 21st century.
Exactly. It's much less glamorous than the films. The when you see people racing is when they have to serve it on someone personally, when you're worried that someone won't engage and acknowledge service, so you have to prove that they've received it.
Okay.
But generally it's done on the portal, and it's a pretty painless process actually compared to how it used to be.
Yeah, did you see The Split?
I haven't actually seen The Split, but everyone says that and says it's amazing.
It's
but
amazing. But in the foreign one, they're all rushing to serve.
Exactly. And that's, again, if you've got another jurisdiction, then often you will have to serve someone if they live there in that jurisdiction, and that's when it becomes a little bit more tricky, making sure that you follow the rules of the country where you're serving the person.
Okay. So if I'm UK, my husband's UK, I personally go on that portal, or I contact my solicitor and the solicitor?
Either. So the solicitor can do it for you, or you can do it yourself. And if you wanted to, and you had the right relationship with your partner, you could be joint applicants rather than a sole applicant, so that you feel that you're both doing the process together. Mm-hmm. Or you go online and you set up an account, and it's quite easy from there.
Okay.
You just need your marriage certificate. Or
if you can find it,
exactly.
Dust it off.
Yeah. And if you can't find it, you can usually order a new one from where you got married.
Oh, okay. Good tip. And then I know we don't have to go and fight it out in court these days. Quite anti that being the option. So I think you mentioned something about non-court dispute resolution, and there are lots of words that I hear a lot, but I don't necessarily know what they mean. So what is non-court dispute resolution, and what options?
So it covers a sort of a spectrum of alternatives, as you say. To when I started 20 years ago, you'd go to a meeting and you'd finish the meeting and you'd go upstairs and you'd issue court proceedings. And
so you'd literally say, see you in court.
You'd literally just, you wouldn't even discuss other options. You just issued. Whereas now, the good thing is there's lots of options if they're right for you. And so it covers like a collective group of options, which is mediation, where you would sit with a third-party mediator and they guide you and help you reach an agreement. They don't advise you, but they're there to facilitate the discussions. Mm-hmm. And then you can have arbitration, which is the only binding non-court dispute resolution. So it's essentially a sort of shortened private version of court proceedings, where you pay for an arbitrator who's usually a judge at court, and they sit and preside over your case, but when they make their award, it's binding on you both, and so you both have to sign up to arbitration. And
with arbitration, do you each have your solicitor as well?
Yes, that's right. And you have a barrister as well, as if you were in court. So it's the same process, but it's private, because you're usually in the chambers of the barristers or the solicitors' offices. You're not in court, and it's a lot more... you drive the timing. So if you want it done quickly, you can usually find an arbitrator who's available, rather than waiting months and months and months for court hearings, and you avoid the delays of the court saying the hearing's been relisted because we don't have a judge.
And when you say you both sign up to it, is it a case you both sign up to it and you both have to then complete it?
Exactly. So you sign up to it and you start the process, and then you're sort of stuck with it. And I think that's where over the years people have become better at understanding it, but it used to be a little bit more like, oh, maybe not that option because it feels a bit final, as opposed to mediation where it's not binding. So you can go through hours of mediation, but at the end, if you don't feel comfortable, you don't have to stick to what you've discussed. I
mean, it feels to me that someone like the arbitrator with that amount of power is going to decide if you keep dragging it out anyway.
Yes, exactly. But I think the good thing about arbitration is that you've got a third party who's actually deciding for you, but it's in a process that's shorter, and you feel more in control of the process. And as I say, it's private and you're not sitting in court all day. Some people find it quite stressful with a tannoy going off, and it's very hectic, whereas you're in a safe environment in the solicitor's office.
Yeah, I suppose it feels less formal. Less
formal, exactly. Yeah. And then the other option is you can actually have one lawyer to act for a couple, but again, that has to be in the right circumstances, and a collaborative lawyer, where you each have a collaborative lawyer, but they work together to try to find a sort of solution for both of you. So there's lots of different ways. And then the other way, actually, is also private FDR, it's private financial dispute resolution hearing, where you're essentially, again, you're paying a judge to come and sit and give you their view of where they think your case will end up. So they'll say, this is what a judge at a final hearing might order. And then it's meant to help you spend the day negotiating based on that, so that you kind of cut through lots of court hearings to get there.
So all these things sound like they save time, which hopefully saves money.
Exactly. Yeah, it saves time, saves money, and hopefully also helps your relationship, because you're not going through months and months and months of back and forth and waiting for court hearings, and you're trying to find a solution where you both feel that you've had your fair, sort of your say, and you've been able to listen and take advice, but you're cutting through it.
And how do you know which solicitors do which one of those things?
So it's quite hard. There's a resolution, which is most family lawyers are signed up to. If you go onto that website, it will list which lawyers do what. But really, you have to do a bit of research, hopefully speak to someone who's possibly been through the process and get a recommendation. But if you go on to people's bios, it will say what they do. And if you go to a solicitor, they should give you in the very early stages the options that you've got, rather than just saying issue.
And then what are the grounds for divorce? I keep hearing this no-fault divorce thing as well.
Exactly. So that's relatively new. So sort of in days gone by, you used to have a reason, which is why people always thought, what's my reason for divorce? And you used to read about people having to be separated for 2 years and things like that. Whereas now, thankfully, it's changed. So you have to have, your relationship has to irretrievably broken down, and you have to be married for a year.
Do you have to, how do you prove it's broken down? You both just say?
Or one of you just says, it's broken down. And that's it. You don't, it's no fault. It's a no fault jurisdiction. So it doesn't matter if someone's committed adultery, for example, and you can divorce someone if you don't want to be married to them anymore.
Yeah, I suppose that just makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't. I suppose if you're blaming somebody and you're accepting fault, then that just can change the dynamic.
Exactly. And I think it just means that you're not going, again, we used to spend months going backwards and forwards about who was to blame and who would issue, and it felt very difficult early on, whereas now you don't have to blame someone in that way. So it's there to make it feel less personal and more, this is a joint decision, or if it's not, it doesn't matter because it's no one's fault.
Yeah.
And so it was meant to make the process slightly easier, but you still have to have the decision of, will you be a sole applicant or a joint applicant? And obviously someone's still got to decide that they want to start the process, but it generally has made it less acrimonious at the start.
How long does it take? Like if we were speedy and both agreed, what's the fastest? And then what's the more common amount of time?
So I think that's what people find frustrating, is if you, as you say, if you want to both be speedy and you both agree, there's this mandatory 5-month cooling off period. So you issue your divorce petition and then you have to wait. So you're not going to be divorced, even if you do everything on the day that you can do it, before about 6 or 7 months.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean you can't agree. So that's the divorce itself. And then it doesn't mean you can't agree the money, the finances, and if you've got children, the arrangements for the children. It just means you won't formally be divorced until about 6 or 7 months later.
And what's the point of that 5 months? Have you ever seen anyone go back?
A few people do,
actually.
Oh, yeah, not
sweet.
many. But it's like, it's a cooling off period where you're meant to just reflect, I guess. But I don't think in reality many people do reflect. They just, once you've made that decision, you want to just usually power on through. So I'm not sure it's necessarily working in the way that it was intended. But yeah, a few people do change their minds. I have had people get divorced and get remarried. Or you don't have to, until you're actually divorced, you can stop proceedings if you change your mind. I mean, it's not a sort of conveyor belt. Once you've started, you can't turn back. So I think sometimes it's helpful because it just, possibly one person in the relationship is a little bit further ahead emotionally. And so it just gives everyone a time to catch up and take a breath.
And then let's talk the money. This is a money podcast after all. Let's say I don't really have very much money, very simple affair.
Yeah.
Like, what's the sort of cheapest end I could get?
So, there's the Smith's will, the will version, where you go to Smith's and you buy your own will. And it's a bit like that. If you don't want to spend lots of money, you can do it yourself. But obviously sometimes if you don't have very much, it can actually be more complicated, because how is each party going to have their needs met, and what does that look like? And often, even if you are in a good place with your partner, it really helps to have someone else say, have you thought about this? But there's various different ways of doing it. And of course, you can do it yourself. The petition itself, by the way, to issue is £593.
So it's going to cost at least that.
Yes, exactly. And what you want to avoid is doing it yourself and then years later thinking, I wish I had thought about that. And so sometimes it pays off to just put a little bit of money towards getting advice to make sure that you're completely protected and that you've thought about everything.
Yeah, because I heard that story about the man who was a hippie.
Yes.
Didn't get a financial, is it disclosure or order? What's it called?
He didn't get an order. So he didn't have a binding and enforceable order from court. Yeah, that was the 𝗏𝗏𝗏 case.
And then many years later,
Exactly.
his wife came, decades later, I think, came back and said, now you're really rich.
Yes.
Let's revisit this.
Exactly. I mean, that is extreme and that doesn't usually happen. But what that's made all family lawyers do is say to clients, you must get a court order which dismisses all claims against each other, so that you don't have that risk of someone coming back when you've completely moved on. So I think it depends. But look, you can spend, if you argue and everything is an issue, then obviously you're going to spend a lot more money than if you possibly have a bit of a kitchen table discussion, or you might mediate, have a few sessions and then put it into an order. So it can be anything from, a couple of £1,000s to hundreds of thousands of pounds. And to some extent that depends on you, what your assets are and your solicitors.
Yeah, and how long you argue it out for.
Exactly.
As well.
Yeah, and I think, again, that goes to, if there's a lot about it is the psychology of it. And if you haven't forgiven someone or you haven't moved on, a lot of people use the divorce process as a sort of way of punishing someone, and completely understandably. But that's why it's really important to get support from people who aren't lawyers, like therapists and financial advisors and all those things, so that you are in the right place and the process isn't drawn out because you're not.
And I suppose you're spending the money with the right professional.
Exactly, yeah. And I regularly tell my clients, don't talk to me about this, go and speak to a therapist, because as much as I'd love to talk to you about it,
you're not a therapist.
No, I'm not a therapist, and I'm probably more expensive than a therapist, and actually it's much better to separate it, and it's much healthier for them because it supports them through the process.
Well, I'm sure people who are considering or just don't know anything about divorce have learnt loads, so thank you so much for your time.